To preface this review, I replayed The Last of Us 2 prior to this season, and I'm someone who loved the game. Something that's extremely divisive, but I won't spoil anything for show-only viewers. This first episode of Season 2 may be construed as a slightly underwhelming start for some people. However, I think it was a great start that took its time with character development and world building. A pretty major departure for the game that essentially flies right into the story's inciting incident. The Last of Us Part 2 is basically one long continuous storm, and having one episode where it's the calm before makes complete sense, while also grounding viewers back into this world and making sure no one is lost. Most of the scenes within this episode because of this are original, but they don't deviate in a sense of changing the narrative, and instead to flesh out characters, their dynamics, and things that the game genuinely couldn't do because that would cripple its pace. The main scene though that is completely original that I think is simultaneously the best is the drunk therapy scene. Craig Mazin really has a knack for elevating the source material, and this scene exemplifies that the most. It's a captivating 5-minute long dialogue scene that's interwoven with rich character building that synergizes with drawing out the truth from Joel. The fundamental premise of this scene is iconic, and I love how blunt Gale is. Introducing alcohol into this type of scene is a perfect way to extrapolate a deeper layer of truth from the characters, since it excises any type of bullshit from therapy and allows the therapist to actually be confrontational. It oddly feels more effective in the sense that being real and authentic is the only path for self-betterment. Then the acting from Pedro especially is flat out flooring. Vulnerability gushing out of his eyes. You can see flashes of trauma, and the moment where you see him pivot and he stands by saving Ellie is also an important start to the narrative through line for his character this season. It reestablishes the immense weight that the finale of the first season has on Joel, but it's done in a way so that Joel can actually express himself since he has that natural hard exterior. Just this one scene alone might land Pedro a Best Acting Emmy nomination. I wouldn't be surprised. And it's really the embodiment of expressions are more powerful than words. I love it when directors actually let the scene breathe and allow the actors to aid the storytelling with their craft. Every other scene in this episode as well has that great underlying layer of acting, like Bella Ramsey especially having to communicate big points of information with detailed acting beats. Since we're jumping past 5 years, that simultaneously imbues the narrative with this mystery of what happened in the past. It makes where we pick up from more engrossing because the character dynamics shifted, and we have to pick up on what happened without overtly being told this information. As an example, I love the moment where Ellie reacts to Joel in the shed after her sparring match. It immediately insinuates a dark point in their past and breathes more nuance into the subject. However, this doesn't apply to the entire episode. Something that Craig does that robs the mystery and intrigue from a given scene is the first one where Abby and the remaining Fireflies are grieving the fallen. In the game, we don't know why this group is here or what their intentions are. All we know is that they're trying to find Joel. Us knowing their intentions in the show takes away some of that intrigue, and this isn't a major flaw and is probably being done so that viewers aren't confused, especially since it's been like 3 years since season 1. It's just a different approach to the story and now actively signals that there is something negative on the literal horizon. Going into an aspect about this episode that was outstanding is Isabella Merced as Dina. Dina was a character in the game that I didn't care that much about, and she didn't necessarily have any secret sauce that made me love her character. However, in the show, I right away love how much charisma, joy, and energy Isabella infuses into Dina. It perfectly meshes into Ellie's personality and character traits, and their bond throughout the episode and small hints of romance were incredibly engrossing. Literally almost every moment with them has some minor insinuation or quick glance that alludes to this fact. I think right away their duo is going to be a major highlight this season, given how much their chemistry was glowing. I'm really excited to see more scenes between them, and the humor between these two characters is great. There were also a lot of callbacks to the games that I liked in some of these scenes. Examples being Ellie fixing and modifying guns, like what she does on the upgrade bench, and why she's wearing crappy shoes throughout the game even gets an explanation. The attention to detail is excellent, and Craig Mason weaves details from the game into moments of character development, and every beat of acting feels like it's densely packed with information for the viewer to devour. This, I feel like, is proof that Craig Mason has that deep understanding of the source material and knows when to deviate at the betterment of the story. Another change around this area is the introduction of the Stalker, and I think this scene was done great justice. It's kind of interesting how people call this episode too slow, even though we had this whole set piece, but I digress. This scene though was such a nice slice of horror, perfectly communicating that through the cinematography where Ellie is being stalked by the infected crossing frame in the background, the sound design being meticulous in what we hear, the pace of the scene with the long drawn out suspense, and Ellie genuinely being afraid here and yelling at the infected accentuates the horror of this scene. Especially since Ellie just prior to this was extremely cocky, so having that fundamental contrast illustrates the dire situation that she's in. I also think the show alludes a bit more heavily to the intelligence of the Stalker, because in the game, they never really did things that were this elaborate and infused with strategy, and were essentially just a more stealthy version of the undead. That's probably more of just a limitation of the medium and having the undead interact with environments in detailed ways. And I feel that suspense in the game is kind of undercut from the fact that you can see through walls. So yet again, I think this is a great change, and I hope Ellie comes across more of these types of infected. She most likely will, and it'll infuse her scenes with the infected with more danger and excitement, because taking out the normal undead at this point for her character isn't that challenging. Unless if her surroundings are falling apart. The Stalker scene also leads into the council scene of Jackson, and this is the type of thing that I wanted from the show. Elaborating on the inner machinations of this society within a post-apocalyptic world. That's something that I was intrigued by when starting the game, and I found myself wanting to know more about this location and how it operated. So the show essentially diving into that by going into urban planning, the moral conundrum of letting people in when you physically can't anymore, and especially this council scene is really interesting. It goes into that overall point that this episode fleshes out the story and world of the game when it didn't have the means to because of the medium being primarily gameplay focused. It's also cool that the characters actually chew on the information of the Stalkers, since that's something that's revealed later into the story, but the characters don't actually address it in depth because there are much bigger things going on. Even with all of these additions and original scenes, this episode still features one that's incredibly faithful, which is the New Year's Eve dance party. This is basically a one-to-one rendition from the game, and even the music used is exactly the same. For the actual quality of this scene, it's of course gorgeous from a set design standpoint and leans into that tonal feeling of warmth and love. Isabella Merced reaffirms how great she is as Dina, in which she's absolutely radiating with joy, and Ellie and Dina from this point are inseparable. Their chemistry is now cemented into being iconic, and this is something that is integral for the upcoming story. The only real change here is when the scene is happening, because Craig Mazin is deciding to use this scene as the primary moment of their bonding, when in the game, it was used as a flashback of remembering the good times they had together. And this flashback comes pretty late into the story. It obviously has its narrative importance where it's placed, but I think its placement in the show serves its own great purpose. It's kind of hard to judge how all this will play out from an overall story perspective because the way The Last of Us 2 was structured was really heavy on flashbacks, and this episode features some of those flashbacks of development. Which, speaking briefly on the game's flashbacks, Neil Druckmann wanted to include more scenes like this, but that does negatively affect the pace of the game when it doesn't for the show.
often we build a game that's much bigger than what ends up being the final product. It just slowed things too much as we're barreling towards the end of the story at this point.
I don't think there's really a wrong way of telling the story, and different methods might have their own strengths, but again, that's more or less something to judge when we have the overall picture and can compare and contrast if the show or the game communicates the story better. Episode 1 of Season 2 is honestly as close to perfection as you can really get. It does everything a season opener should do, while also having some action sandwiched between all of the rich development. It's kind of awkward because these first 2 episodes are essentially the prologue of The Last of Us 2. If this prologue were done in one episode like what some people want, then it would most likely feel too rushed, and I'd much rather we take our time. That means that the only natural course was to split this section of the story into 2 episodes. You can argue that the writers want to milk the story, but I don't think there was anything here that was overtly gratuitous and didn't offer some point of interesting development. I'm really looking forward to episode 2, and I hope it's going to be a hole-in-one. Thank you for watching, and I'll be reviewing every episode of The Last of Us Season 2. Please refrain from putting spoilers in the comments, since not everyone has played the games. My Letterboxd, Discord, and Patreon links are in the description, and see you guys next week. Thank you so much to my top patrons, Logan Farmer and Simply Put.